kingdom. And with that, why don't we take some questions? Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah.
We all have that need for purpose. Thanks. The other was, Lewis says about the story you were telling. That's a heck of a story.
Yeah.
Except it doesn't have a good ending. It doesn't have a nice ending.
Yep.
So I'm wondering, we're those holdouts against the world, against modernity. We're fools for Christ's sake. What's the best tool for recognizing and rejecting the myth? Or in other words, what's our foot in the fire?
Yeah, good. What's our foot in the fire? Good. Okay, so a couple things. One, the idea of that we have work to do. This is an interesting thing I didn't get into, but there's just like a funny little coincidence. So if you notice, in Underland, all the gnomes are super depressed. If you read the story, the little gnomes that she's enslaved are just like constantly walking around gloomy, like, and then they repeat these little catechism questions like, few return to the sunlit, many fall down to the underland, but few return to the sunlit lands. And they just kind of these really gloomy things until they kill the witch and the spell breaks, and then they're like, woo, we're like the funnest little gnomes you ever met. And they're like hopping around and like, we live down even deeper and it's great down there and we're happy and we're good. And you're like, wait, what is this? There's a way in which I think Lewis viewed modern conditions of labor, like of work, as the kind of like soul-crushing drudgery that is an enslavement. In other words, you think about, there's actually, and so that's an interesting element, and then Joe Minnick, I mentioned him, he wrote this little book, Enduring Divine Absence, The Challenge of Modern Atheism. So he wrote this little one. Then he also wrote a bigger one called Bulwarks of Unbelief. And in that one, he's trying to wrestle with the fact that widespread atheism in the Enlightenment was isolated to French salons, like intellectuals, like it was like this really like highbrow intellectual thing, but it's with industrialization that all of a sudden that form of unbelief spreads to the masses of people. And he's kind of wrestling with why was it that when everybody moved from the like guilds in the country and the world to like factories and then later to offices, why did that lead to a explosion of unbelief? And he thinks that it has to do with that like soul-sucking nature of modern labor. That like it turns you into the gnome. He doesn't use that image, but like that's my connection, is it turns you into the depressed gnomes. So the witch saying, I have work for you to do, means you're going to be the cog in my machine that's just going to you're just going to be ground up into the machinery of progress, and just like we're going to suck the soul out of you and attach you to the matrix, and you're just going to be, right? And so part of the liberation is you should have meaningful work and you should know what work is for. And so then that work, in order to be meaningful, has to be connected to God. You have to do it for His, whatever you do, right? Work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for the witch. She says, I have work for you to do. And you're like, I don't work for you. I work for Him. So now my labor, and it may still be drudgery. People have always had really lousy jobs in the history of the world. Like your job probably is is better than some of the other ones. But the orientation to your work is different because it's always in an imminent frame, and it's always for my boss, and it's always down here, and it has no connection to up there. So that's one way to put the foot in the fire. The other part of your question, though, was about what? The second, you said you quoted that piece, and there was something else I said that. Oh, yeah, so good. So, yeah, it has a bad ending. So the thing is like on the one hand, it depends on what part of the story you focus on, and I think what Lewis is thinking is, the myth of evolution has this, like, we all like tragic stories are still attractive to lots of people. So Lewis in particular found, I think he saw a lot of connections between like the Norse mythology, which is a little bit unique relative to other mythologies, because in the Norse mythology, the gods lose to the giants. Like the ice giants come and attack the gods, and Ragnarok is when the gods lose. And so the end of the story is not like, finally Zeus wins, or finally Marduk wins, or like, there's not this like comic ending of like, and then our gods triumphed. In the Norse is like our gods, the gods that we worship, Father Odin loses in the end. And the whole notion was, but you stay by him anyway. You go down with the ship. And there was a kind of nobility and courage in the face of insurmountable odds in losing that way. And Lewis said, that's the same, whatever appeal that Norse myth made to human beings, the modern myth of evolution makes the same appeal. And it's, do you have the courage to face the world is going to run down? You can do great things in the meantime, but in the end, it's all meaningless. Do you have the courage to stand in the face of that with your chin up and go down with the ship? Like, that's part of the appeal of atheism, is that you will accept the high and lonely destiny of seeing reality as it really is and not flinching, whereas most people are too afraid of that, and so they cling to their wish fulfillment fairy tales. And so Lewis's point is that appeal to that sort of nobility in us, that courage in the face of insurmountable odds, is part of the appeal. So don't act like, if you point out like, hey, but this story is pretty lousy, like everybody, the lights go out and it's over. That's pretty depressing. And they're like, that's actually part of the appeal. So you can't debunk it that way. You have to actually debunk it in a different way. That true nobility, true sacrifice, like that thing, you want to like take it and put it in the true story, right? A story of sacrifice where there's a resurrection on the other side of death.
Thank you. Thank you. Taking what you just said from the theoretical to practical, my uncle has kind of moved from this new atheist to kind of the nice atheist.
Yeah.
How do I evangelize to something more Christian? Like, what's the strategy there?
Yeah, so I think with the nice atheists, typically what they're wanting to do is they want to keep Christianity and religion as sort of a good coping story. So the witch is like, hey, stop telling your fairy tales. But the nice atheists are like, you can tell your fairy tales, it's fine. We're good with you and your little fairy tales, but they're still going to patronize you. And they'll often sort of like try to describe the sociological functions that religion does. Like, it allows for good feelings, and it allows for cooperation, and it allows for a feeling of meaning and purpose and transcendence. So they can recognize all the fruit, and they want to keep the fruit, and so they're not going to like try to get you to not believe, but they are going to treat you as though you're like they see through your belief, not the other way around. I think part of the strategy at some level is for you to like maybe I want to put it is they're assuming the center and they're tolerating you. Does that make sense? Like they're assuming like, well, the world really isn't that way, but it's cute that you think so, and it actually is useful. And so you know what? You can keep believing that. You do you, right? Like it's that kind of, like there's a little bit of a, and it's actually good, and they'll actually defend you against the bad atheists who are like, we want to end religion in the world, and they're like, no, there's actually good stuff, and if we do that, then everybody's just going to fall into chaos and fight each other. And you're like, yeah, why is that? It's interesting that we would do that. It's almost like we're sinners or something crazy. And so you would like point out that it's a funny thing, and then you're going to assume the center back. You're going to say, actually, though, yeah, no, nice atheist. Like this is what Lewis does in his fiction. So if you know the story in That Hideous Strength, the company of St. Anne's is like the church kind of, right? It's like these are the believers. And they have an atheist, McPhee, who's the skeptic. And they're like, yeah, you can stay around. We're not going to put you in charge of anything. But it's cute that you want to keep, he's tolerated. And it's like there's actually a psychological, mental thing that you have to do where you assume the center. And you say, oh, it's cute that you just think that religion is this, right? You can kind of do it back, like in your own head. You don't have to treat them patronizingly the way they do. But in your own mind, it's like, that's great that you feel it. And then out of that, then two things. Sincerity for their own good, and don't let them, we're not playing games. This isn't like an interesting exercise on the SAT, which is how they kind of orient to things, right? So when I think about the conversation, like Jordan Peterson's a little bit unique in this because I think he actually takes the question seriously. Others are too busy like analyzing religion to like get down to like, yeah, but did he rise? And to kind of constantly push the question like, what would happen? Like Peterson actually, I think, feels the force of this. Like if God is real and Jesus rose from the dead, he's like, everything is different. Like the whole everything is different. And that's what scares the heck out of him. Others are not that far, and you want to get them to where like, yeah, no, but like what if it's true though? Like what if the guy walked out of the tomb? What if he ascended to God's right hand? What if he's going to return to judge the living and the dead? Like, but like actually, like in the same way that, Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president. Like in that historical sense, it happened, and he's reigning now. What then? Not as a interesting psychological and sociological phenomena for you to study. That's actually keeping it at a safe distance, and you kind of want to find ways to like puncture that by assuming the center, and then caring enough about their soul to be like, we're not playing games. Read Great Divorce, right? Like there's a scene in the Great Divorce where the bishop, the unbelieving apostate bishop, is talking to his friend who became a fundamentalist late in life and became a real Christian. And he's like, and the bishop's like, well, you know, you've been in hell. And he's like, well, that's certainly a point of view. And he's like, I'm not doing a point of view. He's like, and then he says, I'm not seeing what point you're trying to make. And the solid spirit says, I'm not trying to make a point. I'm telling you to repent and believe. Like making a point is an academic exercise and like considering different arguments. He's like, I'm not doing that. I am saying, repent and believe in Jesus. That's what I'm saying. And so like to constantly bring it back to like your soul, which means you have to care about their soul. Yeah, we'll go there first and then back over here. Yeah.
Sir, not knowing what's coming down the pike,
Yeah.
we know, according to Jesus' own words, that there's coming a time when there'll be a great persecution, and believers will be persecuted, even put to death for His name's sake. So how do you get your children and your grandchildren to a place where beyond a timid, Aslan is real, they are willing, they love not their lives even unto death. How do you instill that kind of actionable courage where they stand when, as you said, Satan has no hold over one who doesn't fear the loss of his life? But how do you instill that kind of courage in young people not yet seen the brutality of Satan?
What the stakes are, yeah. So, so Lewis has a line somewhere. He says, I will not be able to obey God, honor God on the highest occasions if I never learn to honor Him on the lowest. So there's an element of like practice. He has a notion of what he calls good pretending, which he says, kids are always playing with, kids fight with swords or play house or play dress up. And that's and like we encourage that because that's how they're going to learn how to grow up. So at some level, like with kids, you're going, okay, yeah, they're not having to face somebody like an overt heavy persecution, but they might get made fun of on their baseball team for being a Christian, right? And so you're trying to always push them to like, you're not trying to shield them from that sort of encounter, but you're instead trying to push them so that they can learn to flex a little bit of spiritual muscle in the face. So like my boys, they go to a Christian school, they do lots of Christian stuff, but we play baseball on non-Christian teams, or with there's some Christians, some not. It's the public high school, and I want them to be like, hey, there's gonna come a moment when somebody's gonna say something or want to do something, and it's like, are you ready for that moment? Are you ready to say, but no, I can't because I'm a Christian? Like it's like that, and it's like that's actually really for the spiritual muscles they have. That's pretty hard. Right? You might get made fun of by your friends. They thought you were cool until that moment. And so it's like, yeah, but you're a Christian first. Before you're a member of that team, you're a Christian first. So I want you to be a good member of that team, and you'll be a good teammate. But you're a Christian first, which means I'm anticipating. So and I talk to them about that for my own self. I'm like, hey guys, I applied. I'm the assistant varsity baseball coach of Moscow Public High School. But we've talked about the fact that like, buddy, if they find my Twitter account, like it's going to be a thing. Like because somebody's going to find it and they're going to be like, oh, you're the pastor of that crazy church, and you wrote a book called The Sin of what now? The Sin of Empathy, and you're teaching, like in other words, I'm going to get blowback if certain people find out. It'll be, and it's like, and I want them to see me with like an eagerness about that, not a fear about that. It's like that will be awesome. It will be I may not coach anymore, but it will be a wonderful couple of weeks, and you will, and they will bear the burden of it, because it's like when they kick me off the team, it's like, why did we liked your dad? He was a good coach. What happened? And then now he's going to have to explain to his teammates, you know what I mean? Like there's all, and so I'm like, hey, prepare for that, be ready for that. And so little things, big things, just find ways to like establish yourself as a public Christian in spaces that are going to get you spurned for it. And it's like that's how you train the muscles so that if something bigger comes, you've actually practiced. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Rigney. Could you describe the difference between productivity and fruitfulness again? Because
Yeah.
I think you mentioned
Yeah.
the modern mentality of always being busy
Yeah.
and something to that effect.
Yeah, so I think, so at one level, this is one of those things that I never correct anybody over it. I sort of like throw this out as a food for thought. What difference does product versus productivity versus fruitfulness make in your own imagination? But the key difference, insofar as there is one, is productivity means constant, never-ending optimization. Machines don't need to rest. Now, of course, they do. They need upkeep and repair. But it's like, if you think of yourself in terms of the kind of constant productivity that a machine has, which means sleep becomes not a gift from God, but an interruption to you optimizing yourself. And you're always going to be trying to find ways to like minimum. Okay, I can only sleep this much time, and I can only do this much, and the stimulants and everything else that you do to try to like sort of goose the engine a little bit. That's productivity. I think one of the big ways that your attitude toward the Sabbath is like the test case for this. Like it is the thing that will determine whether or not you think in productivity. If you think of the Sabbath of resting like one day a week going, but we're just not gonna. We're gonna just do other things. We're gonna worship God and we're gonna enjoy things. And you think, but then I will fall behind. Right? I won't be productive. And it's like, and it feels like a thing. It's like, yeah, you're like, God just put his finger on a thing for you. And you need to instead say, what God says is, if you will trust me, and you will work for 6 days, and you will rest for that one, I will make you abundantly fruitful. Like, you will not be as productive. You will be much more fruitful. And you could cash it out in terms of longevity. You're not going to burn yourself out, right? Like all of these sort of things that like, hey, that day of rest actually is a recharge moment. But if you think of it first and foremost as it will make you more fruitful and more holistically fruitful, because it's not just about optimizing or working through your endless to-do list, but instead it's about like honoring God in work and rest. That's the kind of fundamental divide. So if I was counseling anybody saying, hey, here's the thing I like to do on Sunday, can I do that? Is that okay? It's all like my first question is it about getting ahead? Is it about getting ahead? Is it about like, maximizing and optimizing productivity? Then I'd say that's a problem. I said you probably should not. You should trust the Lord and do that on Saturday or Monday. You should totally do the thing, but like on Sunday, do something else that doesn't have that immediate productivity boost in your own psychology. That's the first thing. Here, and then we'll go back. Let's keep going back and forth.
So you had mentioned in your talk a couple of ways of fighting against the falling behind.
Yeah.
And Sabbath was one of them.
Yeah.
The other one was get out, touch grass.
Touch grass.
Do things that are connected to things that are out of your control.
Right.
Can you elaborate on some of the things that are available to us to get unplugged from that world of moving forward?
Yeah. It really is like learning, there's different kind of skills or activities, and I don't have an exhaustive list, and I'm trying to think of ones that, have been particularly helpful for me. We keep a garden. My wife and I build the things, and then my wife and my sons will plant the stuff. And it's like we don't mainly use it for food. It's not like we're trying to it's like, great, we get some more tomatoes or something. But it's fun. It's a fun activity to do. Cuts with rhythms. You can only do certain things certain ways. Requires effort, labor, but you have to trust God with it, and you have to learn things. Gardens were much easier for us in Minnesota than they are water and desert. Gardens are much harder in the desert. So like there's all kinds of things like that you could do as a real practical way to kind of just like cultivate that habit. I had another thought. That was a setup for the real thought that just eluded me. So you asked, are there other ways? I know what to say. Your prayers actually could be a way that you can give this muscle a workout. Lewis has a line somewhere where he says, some men pray quietly lest God actually hear him, which he, poor man, never intended. Okay? And he's getting at the idea that sometimes we pray safe prayers because you never know because if they're answered or not, you don't know. And it's safe. And you can do this in a very pious way. You can be like, we just trust you, God. But like you never pray prayers that require risk-taking. And the reason why I think that, working in prayers that require something, like, Lord, if you don't show up, it's just not going to happen, is a way of reinforcing. Like this is how we feel whenever you get a real concrete answer to prayer. Like, what did you just learn about the universe? There's somebody out there, right? Like, there's an agency. Like I prayed that, and then boom, it happened. And it's like, and it wasn't magic. It wasn't like it wasn't like the vending machine. I put in a coin and I got my Coke. Okay? It wasn't like I rubbed the lamp and the genie popped out. It was like I asked and he answered. There was a person on the other end. Holy moly, what is this world? And so praying prayers where that would be like, if for things to happen, God would have to show up. Now, the flip side of that is you pray prayers like that, you could be disappointed. And that's what we're afraid of. We don't pray big prayers because if God didn't show up, then we would all of a sudden go, maybe I'm posting letters to a non-existent address. Maybe there's nobody at the other end. Maybe this is like when I wrote letters to Santa as a kid, and my parents we did this. My mom, they would burn them in the fire. And I was like, this made sense to a 5-year-old. They're like, yeah, we need you to write. It was actually funny. It was like, we need you to write 2 letters, identical. Yeah, because you have to. Then you burned one. And what happened to the other one? I never asked the question, what happened to the other one? It's like I went to the store so they could buy the gifts. But it was like you just burned it up, and then it was like all of a sudden on Christmas morning, it was like, that's the thing I asked for. Like, it works. Okay? But then you realize, like, oh, there's this other thing involved. But if you're posting mail to a non-existent address, like we don't ask because we're afraid we won't receive. And so that's part of like the posture of risk and cultivating a way of seeing the world that like God's real, like he'll answer your prayers. And we often rob ourselves of the faith strengthening out of fear of being disappointed. Back there. In the back right there. And then, oh.
So the witch's spell is modernism, and you mentioned reason that might fight against it and be consumed in passion. There's a movement of different people trying to exercise their reason to come to conclusions that may contradict modernism. Does Lewis anticipate, or do you suspect whether modernism is going to hold, or will something replace it? If something will replace it, what is it?
Yeah, so like I think at some level, so this is what's interesting about the present moment, is I think at some level the deep structures, I think Lewis is still right that the deep structure of our imagination and mind is naturalism, evolutionary naturalism. I think for most people is like the deep structure. But atheism is a really bleak. It is actually, so like the bleakness of it for most normal people who don't have that kind of like tragic bone in their body, who are like, I want to be with Father Odin against the ice giants, and they're just like, I just want to be a normal person who does normal things and has good things happen, means that they don't want to go full atheist. They want to believe in something like good vibes. Okay? And Lewis recognized this in his own day, is he thought that he treated pantheism as like what a lot of people, he thinks that's the biggest wish fulfillment fantasy. Like when people talk about wish fulfillment, he's like, pantheism is like the greatest wish fulfillment religion ever. Because what it allows you to do is you don't have a father in heaven who's telling you what to do. But instead it's like this is Mere Christianity, he says, if you're feeling good, You wake up and you're feeling like, man, it's a good day, the sun's shining and it's bright, and you don't want to think about the fact that it's just matter in motion careening toward the extinction of the sun. You're like, there's a force moving through reality, and I'm riding that wave, and like it's karma guiding me, and if I do good things come back around, and it's like you just have all the good vibes and because it's pantheism. Okay. On the other hand, if later that day you want to do something that's not quite legal or immoral, or that most people would frown upon, it's like, well, that pantheistic life force doesn't care, right? That pantheistic life force is not going to tell you were wrong. You can kind of just go, I'm just riding the life force. And so it basically gives you he says it gives you all the thrill of religion without any of the costs. And he said, boy, that's convenient. This is the wish fulfillment thing. I want all the thrill of the world has these forces and I'm a part of it with all of but I can do whatever I want and nobody's going to tell me no. And he's like, that combo is like, so I think I think the shift from new atheism to nice atheism is partly a like rearguard effort on their part to like shore up the foundations of evolutionary whatever. But increasingly people, while all of their scientific training will be evolution, they will be dabbling in stuff. And there are other agencies in the world. And so all of a sudden they will like find that like, no, there are spirits and there are things, and that will, so like resurgent paganism of some kind, or invention of paganism or reinvention of paganism, I think is very much a live option. And why like the golden age of, once we move past religion, we'll come into this golden age of scientific progress. It's like real spotty. And I think it won't take, because human beings, because the world is the way it is. God, there are spirits, there are angels, there are demons. Last question. Go there. Yeah.
So you have written and spoken a great deal about the difference between empathy and sympathy.
Mm-hmm.
Have you found an example in Narnia that would illustrate those differences?
Empathy and sympathy in Narnia. There's pity parties. Edmund throws a pity party at the beginning of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then it leads him to be really angry and switch sides. It's one of the fun things about Narnia is that like everybody's like, boy, wouldn't it be cool if I went through a wardrobe? And it's like, not if you're Edmund. Like the question it actually poses, anytime any of you kids, you're like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if like I opened a door and I went into another world? And it's like, not if you're a stinker on this side. Because if you're a stinker on this side, like you will meet the witch on that side, right? If you're Lucy, it'll be great. You'll meet a fawn, he'll become your best friend, right? It'll be awesome. But if you're Edmund over here, if you're pity party, whiner, bully, then you get into Narnia and it will go badly for you. So I think that's the one that comes to my head, but I may be not remembering. The book that does more of the sympathy, empathy stuff in Lewis is Great Divorce. So Great Divorce, all of the ghosts in Great Divorce, almost all of them, try to manipulate the empathy and pity of their conversation partner. They're just, it's woe is me. You send me back to the lonely streets. And she's like, stop using pity the wrong way around. You're using it to blackmail, and it doesn't work anymore. And so Lewis was very sensitive to this. I think because there's biographical reasons. I think that Janie Moore, Mrs. Moore, Patty Moore's mom, Patty was his friend in the war, said, hey, if I die, you take care of my dad. You die, you take care of my mom. Patty died, so he's going to take care of his mom. And it's a really odd relationship. I think she was super, like, pity party, and would be very hostile if, like, her needs weren't catered to. And so I think Lewis's sensitivity to that, because it shows up in Till We Have Faces and Great Divorce and The Four Loves, and you just kind of start walking through a lot of books, and it's there. And it's like, I think he had that personal, and I think he was tempted to do it himself. I think he had a little self-pitying attitude that he had to kill. So, very good. Thank you, guys.